Hi everyone, I'm Anya Parampil and you're watching Redlines. This week, the United Kingdom's House of Commons passed Prime Minister Boris Johnson's version of the European Union Withdrawal Agreement Bill by a 358 to 234 majority. The agreement sets an official date for Brexit, January 31st, 2020, and places a time limit on trade negotiations, declaring December 2020 to be the end of the UK's transitional period out of the EU. Legislators will discuss the bill once again following a break for New Year's and will then send it to the House of Lords for final approval, meaning that by this time next month, Brexit will be a reality. To discuss Britain's exit from the European Union, as well as the Labour Party's recent devastating loss at the polls, I spoke earlier with former UK parliamentarian George Galloway. He's also the host of the Mother of All talk shows, which you can catch every Sunday at 7 p.m. GMT, that's 2 p.m. Eastern Time, on Sputnik Radio and RT. Here's our conversation. Thanks so much for joining me this evening, your time, afternoon, my time, George. What is the core of the Tory Brexit plan passed by the House of Commons this week?
Well, the significant difference between the Boris Johnson plan, which has now passed, and the various Theresa May plans that never passed, is that there's now a border between Britain and Ireland, and therefore Britain and the European Union, down the middle of the Irish Sea, which from my point of view is a very substantial improvement because it accelerates the day when Ireland will be reunited and independent, 100 years after it voted so to be, a determination that was, of course, drowned in blood. But for the rest of it, it's pretty much as Theresa May intended, that we will not be in the European Union, but will not substantially seek to undercut the European Union in terms of regulation and standards and so on. In other words, we will shadow to some extent the European Union, at least in the beginning. In my view, over a period of years, that shadowing will become rather fainter. But we will be free from the 31st of January, just a month or so now. It will be our first time to be a sovereign, independent country since joining the European Union way back in 1973. So it's a red letter day. It's quite a substantial day. As I think you know, my attitude is that Brexit is a necessary but not sufficient condition to build a better Britain. It's necessary because we had to be free of the strictures, neoliberal, globalized capitalism's form of restriction, trying to homogenize all economies, which in the end beggars some and profits mightily others, principally the German, but to some extent also the French, the rest of the European Union's trailing behind. And we had to get free of that. But if we keep re-electing governments like Boris Johnson's, then we'll not make the most of that freedom, that's for sure.
Well, according to the RT UK, quote, the government removed clauses from the bill which had promised alignment with the EU on workers' rights, saying that they would be protected and enhanced under a domestic employment bill. What is the meaning of this? Do you trust the Tories to look out for the British worker?
Well, I don't trust the EU to look out for the British worker or any worker in the EU. If you were to posit the possibility that the EU stood for workers' rights in, say, Greece or Portugal or Spain, then people would laugh at you. The idea that the EU is somehow a champion of workers' rights when it in fact is the epicenter of a neoliberal form of capitalism, which has beggared the best part of 200 million of the citizens of the European Union, is laughable. So I believe you get the workers' rights that you fight for. And we had a very high level of workers' rights in Britain long before we joined the EU. In fact, we've still got more workers' rights in Britain, in the EU, than virtually any other set of workers in the EU. In terms of maternity leave, for example, our maternity leave is way in excess of that which is afforded in the rest of the EU. So maybe it will make the trade unions begin to return to what they were supposed to be, rather than, holiday organizers and social workers. They'll have to get off their backsides and do some organizing in the workplace. We'll get the governments we vote for now, and we'll get the level of labor rights that we are prepared to tolerate and accept.
And to fight for, I suppose.
Right.
Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has described the bill as toxic and referred to it as a battering ram. While many observers were shocked when Corbyn did not win the premiership earlier this month, you were not surprised. Why did you expect this outcome?
Well, he was fatally harmed by the acceptance of the Euro-fanatic wing of the Labour Party's refusal to accept the Brexit referendum result. You don't have to be Einstein to work this out. In 2017, Jeremy Corbyn stood on a left-wing programme promising to accept the Brexit referendum decision. In 2019, just 2 years later, the same set of left-wing policies, the same leader, but having metamorphosed over the preceding 24 months into someone refusing to accept the Brexit decision. And that's what done for him. And I knew that it would, and I knew exactly where it would. And so it came to pass. The Midlands of England, the Northeast, Northwest, the Southern Wales, West Wales, all of these parts, which voted overwhelmingly to leave the EU, were never going to reward Jeremy Corbyn for, as they saw it, betraying their Brexit vote. The bottom line is, more people voted for Brexit than for anything or anyone in British history. And to tell 17.5 million people you were going to force them to vote again because you didn't like how they voted the first time was always an electoral catastrophe waiting to happen.
I think it's something like 52 or 50, something like that, of the seats lost by Labour in this election voted out of the 54 seats voted for Brexit overwhelmingly. So
Yeah.
I know you have tremendous respect for Jeremy Corbyn, but I wonder, do you believe he could have done anything differently, how he managed Brexit or even responded to allegations of anti-Semitism within Labour, for example, throughout his reign as leader of the party?
Well, I don't know how long you've got, but because I could talk all night about this. He made two fundamental errors. Let's deal with the one you raised last. First, the failure to confront the anti-Semitism allegations really corroded the Corbyn leadership for 4 long years and ultimately played a contributory role to the disastrous result that he got in the general election. He ought to have, and indeed I personally cautioned him to, confront this in a very strong, forthright manner right from the beginning, to refuse the conflation between criticism of Israeli crimes with the foul poison of anti-Semitism, the most virulent form of racism in the last century or more. He simply refused to resist that, instead choosing to retreat upon retreat upon retreat, capitulate, surrender, beg forgiveness, throw his friends under a bus one after the other, after the other. And that would have been an ugly sight, even if it had worked. It's even uglier because it didn't work. Not a single part of the Israel lobby in Britain was in any way conciliated by this process of capitulation. Instead, you know, we have a saying in Glasgow, if you don't run, they can't chase you. He ran, and he kept on running until he could run no more. And then when he could run no more, they set upon him and devoured him. And now they are triumphant. They are boasting that it was them that done it. As a matter of fact, it was Brexit that done it, but the failure to deal with the anti-Semitism issue properly was a significant contributory factor to a growing sense that this man was not up to being Prime Minister. On the Brexit thing, it was entirely within his power to say, no, we're going to take the same line in 2019 that we took in 2017, that we respect the Brexit referendum result, we accept it, and of course, if you elect us, we will reshape, refashion a relationship with the European Union in our own image. We'll make sure there's no undercutting of workers' rights, wages, environmental concerns, and so on. That would have been a perfectly sellable electoral platform. But he completely capitulated to the middle class, university educated, metropolitan, liberal elite, which the Labour Party has become, has come to represent. If we had time, I'd go into my thesis of the embourgeoisification of Labour and the proletarianization of the Conservatives, who now represent mining areas, steelworking areas. It's very akin to what Donald Trump achieved in the Rust Belt states of the United States. It's almost identical, in fact. And the Labour Party looks like the Clintons. It considers the people who live in these areas a basket of deplorables because they wash their hands in swarfiga because their hands are proper dirty at the end of a day's work, because they smoke, because they don't endlessly agonize about the liberal infatuations of what passes for the left in your country and in mine. And they forgot that every one of these people has a vote. And in an election, everyone's equal. You don't get 2 votes because you've got a university degree.
Well, Corbyn has already announced that he will step down as party leader early next year. What's currently happening within Labour, and where does the party go from here?
Well, it's well on the way to a return to Blairism. The declared candidates so far are all creatures of the Tony Blair era, some of them central to the Tony Blair era. They are all representative of this liberal elite which Labour has become, a Labour movement without workers, an obvious oxymoron. The best candidate, who's not yet in the race, it's the one that Corbyn is backing, is a young woman by the name of Rebecca Long Bailey. You won't have heard of her, very few people have, and I very much doubt that she is the answer to this set of problems. But we'll see who gets the gig. The simple truth is, whoever is the new Labour leader will be to the right of Jeremy Corbyn, because the settled will now inside Labour is that it was the left-wing policies that done it, that done for Labour. So look out for a significant change, both in international political affairs and in domestic political affairs. Look out for a substantial shift to the right. How far that shift goes depends on who wins it. The main standard bearer of the Blairites is a man called Sir Keir Starmer. Quite some time since Labour had a Sir in a leading position. And the leading centre-left candidate is this woman, Rebecca Long-Bailey. And there's a rainbow in between them, but not a very attractive one.
Not a beautiful rainbow, unfortunately. And what about the status of Northern Ireland and Scotland? How might that be impacted by Brexit? I know you have opposed a second referendum for Scottish independence, but do you believe the Brexit vote or change alters any conditions? Or in some ways, it seems as though an independence movement in Scotland is now driven by neoliberalism and a desire to stay as a part of the EU rather than true independence.
Absolutely. So they want to leave the democratic union of the United Kingdom that they're in, which has no border, which is a small island of English-speaking people, and join an undemocratic European Union where they speak 100 languages and with whom Scotland currently trades virtually nothing at all. I don't think that that will be persuasive in a second Scottish referendum. I'm not against one, by the way. I like referenda. I usually win them. I'm looking forward to the next one. But I don't think that Scotland will vote to leave Britain. But I do think that the north of Ireland is on a highway with no exit ramp to reunification. And that's a very good thing. That's my Brexit bonus.
And it sounds as though you're hopeful leaving the EU will leave British workers in a better place to oppose neoliberalism and fight back and organize at least within their own country rather than worrying about the EU.
Yes, so as I said, it's summed up in Lenin's words, necessary but not sufficient. It was necessary to leave the EU. It will not be sufficient to have left the EU. We'll have to rebuild a proper labour movement. Trade unions will have to begin again acting like trade unions. And an informed populace will have to arm themselves with arguments to stop bad things being done by the British government, which they can then ultimately vote out. You see, the problem is we've got the Conservatives, but we can vote them out. When we were in the EU, we could never vote them out. We were ruled by people whose names we could not pronounce, we probably wouldn't even recognize on the page, whom we didn't elect and could not remove. Now we're responsible for our own future. And I, for one, am looking forward to that era.
The fight continues, and I look forward to speaking with you as it does. I think part of the coolest thing about my former job was that I got to talk to you almost every day. So
I loved it too. The struggle is never over. There's no final victory. There's no final defeat. There's no fat lady comes on and sings. It's a process, not an event. And our duty is to struggle on to either resist the onslaught or to make an onslaught ourselves. One way or the other, now that we're out of the EU, it's down to us.
George Galloway, thanks so much again.
Pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Bye.